My name is Robert Franklin. I'm conducting an oral history interview with Dan Ostergaard on December 7th, 2016. The interview is being conducted on the campus of Washington State University Tri-Cities. I will be talking with Dan about his experiences working at the Hanford site. And for the record, can you state and spell your full name for us?
Okay, my full name is Daniel Vernon Ostergaard. The last name is spelled Ostergaard.
Okay. And your first name?
Dan. I go by Dan. Daniel. Daniel.
Great. When I was doing that boilerplate, I almost said December 7th, 1941.
Me too. Well, that's in my. I still live World War II.
So tell me how and why you came to the Hanford site.
Okay. I got interested in photography in junior high school in Kennewick, and back that would have been. Well, I graduated from high school in '65.
So you're from the Tri-Cities,
right?
area?
I grew up in Kennewick.
Okay. When were you born?
December 27th, 1946.
Okay.
So I got interested in photography kind of through the chemistry class. I was a lab assistant, and the guy who was doing the yearbook needed somebody to shoot pictures. And I'd done a little bit of stuff with my mom's help at home, so that just sort of got the ball rolling. And did the usual school stuff, graduated Kennewick High School. And in high school, shot pictures for the yearbook. We had kind of a unique situation where the yearbook actually provided us the facilities, but they actually bought the pictures from us. So we were, in essence, a little business.
Okay.
We had our accounts down at the local drugstore that had a photo counter, and it was a real good training thing. We were given assignments. The yearbook advisor was named Mr. Shields, and he said, I need a one-column wide picture about 4 inches high, and I want 4 faces in it. I don't care what they're doing. I just want 4 faces. They won't buy the book unless there are faces in it. So that was the kind of direction we were given, and it was up to us to figure it out. And after I finished high school, went to CBC. In high school, I also worked at a portrait lab named Dave's Studio in Kennewick, in the back processing film and prints and doing all the things you do. And continued that at CBC. I had my own stuff shooting on the side, and then went to WSU, or in Pullman, for 2 years. And through that time, I had worked 2 summers for the Hanford Photo Group, one summer in the Fedger building and 1 summer in 300 area in 3705 building. And that was Vietnam era. I enlisted, went in for 2.5 years. Got an early out when they were winding down. I called up my boss, Lance Michael, and I said, hey, I'm getting out of the service. You got any work? And he kind of said, when can you be here? And I said, in a month. Okay, you're hired. That was the interview. Of course, I'd interviewed for 2 summers prior, in essence. Right. So I started doing lab tech work, just kind of whatever was needed to be done. And it was, the reason that was so attractive, because the Hanford Photo Group was like Disneyland. There was everything there somebody with my background could aspire to want. We had the ability to do all the photo processes. We had very competent photographers. They were hired mostly out of Brooks Institute down in Santa Barbara. We called them Brookies, and a lot of people sort of saved the Brookies a lot, we thought. That. After I got out of the service, we had just opened up the photo lab in 3706. So they'd moved it from the old wood lab building in 3705, and went over there, and then just kind of evolved into doing higher level things. The photo group had 3 different photo labs at the time. One in the Fedger building, one in the basement of the ROB, the Battelle building, and then one in 300 area. They had all evolved for a specific purpose. The Fedger Building lab was to keep the AEC/DOE people connected. The ROB lab was just directly for supporting Battelle at the time. They had just gotten the contract in, I think, '64.
What does ROB stand for?
Research Operations Building.
Research Operations Building.
Yeah. Okay. And then 300 area, we did all kinds of things. And this was all pre-computer era. So we had different labs did specific things. The color was done initially in the Federal Building. The ROB was pretty much black and white and copy work. And we did big enlarging and things like that. So some things, the jobs had to move back and forth to each lab's specialty. So we actually had a courier who started at the Federal Building, picked up stuff, and dropped off on the way out.
So you're saying that each lab had their own specialty, and
Right.
there was a courier.
Right. And because each lab was separate and there wasn't a computer, the cloud, or anything like that, everybody had their own numbering system.
Okay.
And which has led to complications to this day.
Tell me about it. I've processed a lot of photos from on site, and it's always very confusing as to why some are stamped 300 area, why some are stamped Patel, why some are stamped 700 area, and this is.
Well, see,
I want you to go into this in detail for me.
Okay, so we'll do that numbering thing then. If you see anything like with a 2-digit and then like an A or a B or a C and then 3 digits afterwards, those are from the ROB lab.
So 2-digit ABC and then 3 numbers.
Yeah, you'd have the idea. First of the year, they would start out at A, and then run through the numbers. The first 2 digits. And so you could look at that. The first 2 was the year always.
Okay.
And the second one was just an arbitrary A, and then if they ran through 999, they went to B and upward. The Federal Building numbers started out pretty much as 4-digit numbers, and that was a carryover from the GE photo lab days. And some of those things I still never have figured out what they did. And then 300 area just started out with the year, 7, 8, whatever, and then generally they run 4 digits. It got to be later on they would run 5 because they were running out of space. And then in 1992, we had our own computer system written, so it kind of linked up. And those dates always started with the first of the year and then the month, 0, 1, and then there was 3 digits after that. So by looking at those numbers, you can, if you see an 89, blah, 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 that was shot in 1989.
Okay.
So that's some of the numbering systems.
Okay.
And then there were other, we supported some of the metallurgical labs and things who had their own thing going on also. So we supported a lot of specialty labs in the 300 area doing things. And so we would process film for them, make prints, and give them back everything. We were doing fuel studies where they would take fuel pins from bundles that had been through the reactor process, and in the 327 building, section them remotely because they're screaming hot. And usually those things are about the diameter of a pencil. So they'd slice that across, and then through periscopes and using 70 millimeter film and Hasselblad cameras is actually shoot like an aerial mosaic of that thing, at 75x or 125x magnification. We would process that film, print it on a machine printer, 2x, and then literally mosaic them together. So you'd end up with like a large pizza. And that would show the cladding and then what had happened to the fuel inside. These things were fairly important. They spent a lot of money making them. So
right. That sounds like very technical.
Well, it was, yeah, we had at all levels, from the PR thing to the technical part, and you supported a lot of engineers for reports. We did a lot of what would be promotional stuff now for people to go back to DC and whatever for pushing their project to get funds. In addition to, and then of course just reprinting negatives or in the file. We had, and that was the other part of the problem with the negatives, is they were retired not in any systematic order. They were just, when the lab ran out of space, we'd box up 5 cabinets worth of negatives, send them off to storage, with the transmittal, but still, you could, and then it got complicated. Well, I say all this sounds silly, but it was all at the time very rational.
Right.
It was that you can't judge. It was they were doing good actually for what they were doing, but the specific photographers tended to work out of specific labs.
Okay.
Because we usually had 7 or 8 full-time photographers going at that time, and some of these guys were more specialized in technical things, and some of them were more people-oriented, and so you had to kind of assign the right type of personality to the job. You didn't want to assign a technical person to go out and shoot a PR thing somewhere. That would get you in trouble.
Yeah.
They just weren't groomed for that.
Right.
And we had, along those lines, there, the thing we had a difficulty with in hiring is we were looking for pretty high-end lab tech people too. And so a lot of these folks would be coming out of Brooks with all this money they've spent training, and they couldn't get a photo job, so we would hire them, but we caution them all the time, this is not going to lead to a photo job. We're hiring you to do this technical thing. A few of them evolved over, and it was very frustrating for some folks who, I'm not doing what I want to do, but we already have, so there's always that line of doing that. And again, back then, we were self-contained. The security was much tighter. I don't know if you've went out to Energy Northwest lately or anything, or if you've ever been there, where they're looking under your car with mirrors and all kinds of things. And in the 70s and 80s, our security was pretty tight.
Okay.
The photographers on the badge, they had the areas listed in a grid, the areas they were accessed to. So it was pretty tight, and we were playing TSA going in the gates at that point. So you just put your lunch in a plastic bag and just walk by and hold it up. So it wasn't metal detectors, but it was security.
Okay.
And so that led to interesting things. The 300 area lab was the largest, and we probably had the most people of any of them. And we did pretty much our own maintenance. These were all chemical processes that needed to be maintained. And so there was a great deal of quality control work going on, of running test strips and reading them and adjusting the chemistries. And just the simple things of inventory. We had pretty much one person, that's all they did was inventory, ordering stuff, seeing that it was in, and then basically rotating the stock so that we were using the oldest first. And there was a lot of stuff going on.
How many? So you worked mostly at the 300?
Right.
Okay, and how many people worked at that operation?
Probably 20, 25.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and the ROB was smaller. It was 2, 3, about 4.
Oh, okay.
And the Federal Building, they did the color, and everybody could do black and white. That was just by default.
Right.
And that was probably more like a dozen. And then there was a video motion picture group down there also. So, probably the height of everything, we were probably running 62 people.
Oh, wow.
And during the FFTF construction, we were doing a shift and a half, basically.
And that would just be like documenting the construction, or?
Oh yeah, well then all the other stuff, because everything that had to do with FFTF was a huge process or project. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just building the facility. You see the white dome out there. There was the high bay and 300 area, all the kinds of research on. Oh my God, it was huge, and so there was people busy all the time doing that.
Okay. Did you have much contact with the video people? Or?
Not a whole lot.
Oh, okay.
That was kind of a different world.
Oh, okay.
There was also kind of the contention, not necessarily nasty, between the labs.
Okay.
There was always a bit of a tension there that, them dummies, they screwed up again, so we got to run down. There was a lot of that kind of stuff going on.
Like a friendly competition?
Pretty much. Mostly friendly.
Mostly friendly. Do you know anybody that worked at the other labs or in the video group that's still around that might want to talk to us?
Let me think that through.
Okay.
Yeah.
We just,
Especially
our collection. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say because I just thinking. I think Bud Mace is gone. Don Brower's gone. it's really thinned out. Well, it's
Yeah.
thinned out everywhere.
Right. As happens. We have several hundred videos in our collection.
You're right.
And so it would be interesting to talk to somebody
Yeah.
about that process and why they filmed certain, because some of them are very interesting films of processes, and so it's kind of.
Oh yeah, they were highly technical. We had a technical person who was just in charge of doing extremely technical things. He was out of RIT, and he did some fabulous stuff. I always enjoyed hanging around Roland.
RIT.
Rochester Institute, yeah.
Oh.
And again, we had to support ourselves. There was no FedEx in the day, and not getting something done because something broke was not an excuse. That was not acceptable. So you always had at least 2 or 3 ways of getting something done.
Right.
And we always did come through. We had a reputation for that.
And how long did you work at the 300 area lab?
Pretty much, well, the last years, probably 25, 30 years straight.
And so, and you started in 72.
Yeah.
Right. So then you would have gone until about the late 90s, early 2000s.
Something like that. Well, there was a migration as everything wound down. As things closed down, the ROB lab was closed first.
Okay.
We moved that activity out to 300 area.
And do you know when that was, roughly when that was closed?
I hate to, I'm telling you wrong, 78, something like that.
Okay.
And then as things tightened up a little bit more, we actually then closed down the Fedger Building lab, which was on the 3rd floor. Much to the happiness of the computer people, because there were leaks on the 3rd floor out of all these processors. We had catch pans and stuff under everything.
Oh, the chemical.
Oh yeah, these are all wet processes. There's
right.
There's nothing digital there.
And do you know when the Fed?
God, again, that's just kind of murky. It's
Okay.
The big change happened for us when the contract changed in about 87 or 88.
And that was from Westing. That was from Westing.
Well, we were actually Battelle.
You were Battelle. Okay.
Right. And the contract changed, the consolidation they like to call it. We ended up getting transferred over to Boeing. Most of the service groups went as a package to Boeing.
Right.
And then when Boeing went out and Lockheed came in, then we were moved to Lockheed. So as it wound down, we had a couple of pretty big layoffs where you just feel like a survivor the day it's done, when they lay off 12 people in your group and there's 4 of you left.
Right.
Stuff like that. But so we kept plugging away out there, and then they finally found enough money to let us go digital.
And what? Oh, it's good. I was going to ask about that. What year was that?
Let's see. I'm trying to think of what machines we were using. We were in the Apple side of the world at that point, and 7200 Mac or something was pretty jazzy at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So again, those dates are just, I could probably do some thinking on that, but I just hate to say something specific. But as we wound down, then they decided that it was too big of an expense to be in 3706.
Okay.
So we ended up moving down to the Snyder building. This was under Lockheed, and set up shop down there. And I was always, by that time, I had migrated my work into more doing archival stuff. I kind of just created that in a way. I got tired of people asking for stuff that I knew we had that nobody could find.
Right.
And so I just started in the time when I didn't have anything better to do. I just literally started going through the drawers.
Okay.
And that kind of got me the bug. And so my intention was to make a 3-ring binder with Hanford's 100 greatest pictures. That was my first goal. Well, that pretty quickly evolved into about 35 or 40 binders.
Yeah, I was going to say that'd be kind of.
Yeah, well, you didn't realize what you were up against, and so you get to the point where you say, okay, I've got enough stuff here to make a collection of each of the reactor areas. So there'd be the 100B book. There would be and do that. And then as a spin-off, I would do aerials. And then wherever I had enough stuff to organize, I would make another binder. And then, about around 2000, when Hazel O'Leary was head of the Department of Energy, she was doing for this great opening up of all the information. And they started a project, the DDTS, RS.
DDRS?
Yep, and that was worked out of the library out there in the 300 area. They had, I think, 5 or 6 derivative declassifiers, and they had a couple of students out there. Their goal was to scan 100 negatives a day. And they would arbitrarily take a storage box. Have you ever seen a storage box? Mm-hmm. A real Hanford box?
No, I don't know if I've seen a Hanford box.
Well, most of these things, early on, most everything was 4x5 negatives. Okay. So it was a half cubic foot box about yay high with the top that comes off. And then inside there'd be rows. And there'd be a manila envelope with glassines mostly, where there would be a date and stuff written on them. And that was kind of, you got the date range to and from. And they started out and they did about 55 boxes. I don't know how they were necessarily selected, but they did that. And the first box they did, they came down to us and wanted to kind of see how they were doing. We had a higher end scanner than they did. They were running off $150 scanners at the time, which was basically trash.
Yeah, really low.
Yeah,
low DPI.
yeah. And those things, you see some of those now, those really crappy looking things.
Yeah.
That was out of that project.
Like 400K
yeah.
size image
40,
file,
yeah.
if you're lucky.
Right.
Yeah. I have we get requests about images that people find
right.
online. They're like, do you have a higher version of that? And I was like, that was scanned in 2002.
Well,
like,
see, that's the disconnect now, and they keep talking about getting me out there to kind of help put some of that to bed and maybe leave a better trail than we did. It's it's an art to find some of that stuff.
I bet.
And you can't do it. I don't know what the mechanism is. I've been out of there now 2.5 years, so I don't know if there's anything in place. But I had pretty much at the time looking for things. I had the ability to request boxes endlessly. And so what I would do is I would get out my notebooks and stuff with all the transmittals and all my little notes I had made on the side. I had handwritten sheets for every time I order a box. And this went on for years. I would note the box and the date, and then I would look for what I wanted, but then anything else that was interesting in there, I would go ahead and make a note of it so I could backtrack a little bit. And that's what I hope that stuff hasn't been disrupted too badly that it can't get in there and say, this is golden. It looks awful, but this will really save you.
Right.
So that takes a lot of dead ends, but it also leads you to discoveries.
Yeah.
And there was always the push to put more stuff into IDMS. My project for 4 years, one of the clerks named Bonnie Campo and I we did 20,000 a year into ARMIS, the database at the time, which would mean, the selection process, that was my call. We'd literally start going through the files, and anything to do with helping the site be cleaned up, remediated, construction, all that was golden stuff. Mm-hmm. So that was the selection process for that. And then if I found, and I kind of took it upon myself, if there were some culturally significant things, I'd put those in too. So I would scan them, I'd transfer them to Bonnie, she would upload them with the appropriate information. So we did 20,000 a year, so we did 80,000.
Wow. Can you expand on culturally significant things?
Well, things like back in the 50s where they would have pensioners' dinners, they celebrated the employees. Mm-hmm. They weren't disposable. They were treated, with much more respect. This is all my personal stuff.
Right.
But it was celebrated more. And then also, up until 58, 59, the city of Richland was a company town, basically owned by GE. And they documented all kinds of cool stuff. And so a lot of that would go in. And just things like the first house being sold, and things like that. And then just the culture, the pictures of the safety prizes. If everybody the thermoses and things, and then probably not socially appropriate things anymore of get some gal up on a ladder for Friday the 13th and holding a broken mirror and, just stuff like that.
Any idea where those or where do those pictures live now? Are those negatives?
Oh,
do they...
it's all at 3212, the newest records.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much where everything is that I know about. And I've tried the damnedest to find everything. It gets to be a challenge. But those first ones they did, that was where what we dubbed the DuPont collection came out of, and the GE collection. Okay. Those first 5 boxes were the D numbers, the P numbers. Those were, of course, the most interesting ones, and that caught my eye right on. And then ultimately, when they were asking, what could we do? The archives, National Archives, they want stuff from us. We've never given them anything, and by that time, I'd kind of rescanned a lot of what I called the D numbers, the DuPont ones, just because they were very, very useful. And
is that what that D stands for?
Okay, we'll go through that. Okay, there were a set of numbers or prefixes. D stood for determinant, of all things.
Okay.
And I found down at when the Crest Museum was still operating, I had enough leeway. I would go down and kind of mine their resources. And I found a memo one day that directed from somebody in Delaware that they wanted this thing photographically copied, and it set the parameters for each 8x10s of each shot and to show construction progress. So there was the P number, which was progress. D was determinate. There's a few E's, which were emergencies. That wasn't used too much. There was S for safety, and there was M for meteorological. I think I got them all. And the D ones, well, of course, the P is progress. And what they generally did down to outhouses almost. They would shoot every couple of weeks or whenever something significant happened, shoot that. So you can combine those into collections of a particular building being built, down to small little workshops and things. And I found that memo down there, and then I found the part that is really the key to that thing, is there were, since everything was automatically classified at some level, just by the nature of it existing, it was classified.
Right.
And they had to move these around to get things made or whatever. So since it was classified, there had to be a transmittal for every time it moved. So here were these onion skin sheets that were listed a set of numbers, and it said, okay, this was D such and such, taken on such and such a day, and this was what it was. That was just part of the security routine. So there was the marker that described that image.
Right.
By default.
Yeah, the metadata kind of
exactly.
produced in an ancillary process.
Right.
To
so, and so when I kind of went, oh, how about this?
That's something.
So I wrote some notebooks just so I could find that stuff easier. And also, what happened? There was a lady before I never even met her, named Flo. She was the archival records genius lady. She could find anything. Flo Underhagen, I believe her name was. And there was somebody in the 70s had taken all those DuPont negatives. They looked kind of like, from the surface, they'd kind of lived a rough life. Mm-hmm. Like they'd probably been just thrown in boxes and stuff. And somebody organized those into the storage boxes, each with an individual manila envelope and the number on the outside, and that was about it. But somebody had organized that somewhere in the 70s, near as I could tell. And then the other, the GE ones, were dubbed the Flow 5. Those were very significant, because that was building up the Cold War stuff. Mm-hmm. And so that was the second project that I suggested to him. The first one was actually we dubbed the Settler Collection. When I was doing my work for getting those 80,000 in there, I kept coming up with pictures of people prior to Hanford.
Right.
And
the residents of
right.
In the town.
Yeah, so I kind of got the bug at that point, and some of the folks I knew, Annette Herford, I knew her from, she worked in the photo group. And
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah, Annette, yeah.
We just recently got the collection of Harry Anderson, and a lot of his photos. And
Good old Harry.
And so we've been going through those, and there's but it's and I know that he worked with Annette and with the White Bluffs and Hanford reunion
Right.
organization.
So I went to the last 5 or 6 of those things, and almost was accepted. But I did work for the government, so that automatically made me suspicious. So.
Oh, right.
Harry was a piece of work.
I've heard.
Yeah, one time on one of the tours, we all went out on a bus, and I come out, and what I did, I had the van, the photo van, and I had some composite big map things I had made. And we had the ability to mount and laminate and everything. So I would show up with the van and hang these things around the side of the van just as talking points for these people. And that would get the conversations going.
Right.
They'd start to look at that and go, oh, well, there's my place. And off you go.
Right.
Cool stuff.
That's really neat.
And so Harry was out there one day, had the van, and he said, you know, you got a van here. How about we go over here and look at something? And I was going, I got to get back to town. It's like, I want to get loose with Harry. Get in all kinds of trouble. But, yeah, he was something else.
And he also worked for...
he was security
the
type.
Project.
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the rumors I hear, he would hang around in bars, basically, and if people were talking too much, get him called in for... He was something else.
Wow. He was one of the... It's just so interesting that he's this transitional figure between White Bluffs and then...
Yeah.
Was...
Well, he was in the right position and probably rogue enough to...
Yeah. And you said Annette worked for the
photo group, yeah.
Okay. Did
right.
she work for your photo group? Or?
She was down in the Federal Building.
Federal Building. Okay.
Right. And so we always got along real well. She was a stickler. I'd show her stuff, and boy, if she thought that date was wrong, she was on your case. Like, but so when they said, "What can we give to the National Archives?" I said, "Well, I've been collecting up these images, and I know a lot about them, and there are about 200 of them. So we did the whole process as a trial thing and pulled retired negatives out of our files to them and kind of learned the whole process. And it got a lot of nice press, and that's what they wanted, say we're making progress. And that went so well, they said, well, what next? And I said, well, we've got all this stuff DuPont shot. We've pretty well got it all scanned into our files. We've kind of got all the information out of it we're going to need. So we went ahead then and retired those over there, which again was great for everybody concerned. Mm-hmm. It's nice to kind of get them over there. And I think that was 5 boxes, 6 boxes. And then the third series we did was GE, kind of the same thing again. So we got a little more sophisticated each time. And then also the ability of IDMS to take file sizes got better each time. We were kind of held down to, 10 meg JPEG compressed at first, and that would only take JPEGs. And then by the time we got to GE, it was like, well, just pretty much send us anything you want, which is just the evolution of the whole thing. So I was making pretty good sized scans.
And is that how? So I'm a little confused. So did you send the originals to NARA, or did you send the scans to NARA?
Nope, they didn't want anything to do with digital. They wanted the physical stuff.
But you scanned the originals and put them in IDMS.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And is that still in IDMS to your knowledge?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
If you get a hold of somebody who can get you to the collections, it's under the GE collection or the DuPont collection.
Because we have access to IDMS.
Okay. Now it's not things are not hardly ever taken out of IDMS. So you do a D number or something, you might come up with the old nasty scan. You might come up with the one we put in.
Okay. I'll make sure to look at the file type and size.
Yeah, because it's a quirky thing to use. Armis, its predecessor for photos, was much better. And what we did a lot of, the folks, and this is what I learned when they were doing their initial work on the DuPont stuff, they were making their best guess as to what it was they were looking at, because they just had a negative in an envelope. And so a lot of those were way off. And so Bonnie and I, if you had spare time, you'd just go show me everything from 1952 or something. And then and they migrated all this stuff over from the Battelle system into the ARMA system. Of course, things never fit the right boxes. And so you kind of just rework the information. We had the ability to do that. Mm-hmm. Put structure in a structure box and maybe leave the title, because a lot of times they would write the title with the structure in it. So it was, again, it was kind of an art form
right.
to define stuff.
Right. Well, I'm totally
You're finding that out, yeah.
Well, I've been in archives for a little while.
Right.
So
yeah. Well, I had the big battle with the GE thing. They wanted to change the file name around to suit their system, which then totally destroyed the provenance of the damn negative.
Right.
It just...
Yeah.
So every time you do a move, you lose something, pretty much. Yeah. And what we did for GE, by then security, we kind of gotten really in tune with security folks and their concerns. They wanted to know what we'd sent off. A lot of times they were more concerned about the negative or the envelope than the negative.
And because the envelope has the information.
Yeah, right. So by the time we got down to doing the GE stuff, I was over-scanning the negative. I was scanning, put it on the flatbed and scan outside the boundaries of the actual negative itself, so they could see whatever had been written in the boundaries. I wasn't cropping or doing anything like that. Oh, right. I was all about giving you the whole package.
Right, because you can also crop that out later.
Later, see, that's it. You can't put it back. And I've always looked at me as kind of being just the intermediary in this process.
Right. For
somebody like me 30 years from now. Right. I don't want to box them in. I learned that real quick.
So refreshing to talk to somebody who understands the basics and things like provenance and how,
because things tie together later.
They do, and you need that if you're coming at it without that institutional knowledge.
And then the other thing I'm sure you've discovered it by now is like the DuPont final report. The 4 volume. Oh boy. Okay, DuPont published probably February, March of '45 what they called their final report. Mm-hmm. It's 4 volumes, 1,500 pages, where they do an incredibly good job of describing what they did without saying a damn word about what they did.
Okay.
Or what it was for.
Right, that sounds...
And that thing is, that and Grove's diaries, if you can stand, not Grove's, Matthias's diaries, those things. But I'll get you the Hanford numbers for those DuPont things, because that is a treasure trove. Once you get in there and start reading, you realize they did everything for a purpose and a reason.
Okay.
It was, and a lot of and then there's some very miscellaneous other reports that link pictures to things that are, but that DuPont report gives you an incredible insight into what they did. So, and that's when I finally discovered that. I was going, oh my God. Mm-hmm. It was so fun over the years. You keep having these, oh my God, I know what this is for.
Yeah.
And so kind of that it just evolved, more and more into me doing archival things and less the other. And of course, I carried a big footprint around because I had all these negatives attached to me.
Right.
And so we moved to Snyder. We actually had to have the floor reinforced where these are great big fireproof safes.
Right.
And so by the time we got down there, and I got them all fitted in, and then we were there for several years, and then they wanted to move us over to the Garlic building here. Mm. And so they'd give me a room to put stuff in, and then as we got it over there, movers had got all the cabinets moved in there, and then the powers that be decided, no, we don't want to file the negatives here. We want to use this room for storing our junk or something. So that was rather traumatic that day. So I ended up putting my stuff in moving boxes, around the hall, various places, and I was still working at them. What I did when I was unloading the drawers, I color-coded each file cabinet. I had a number for each cabinet, and then a little chip of paper that corresponded to that. And then I would start at drawer 1, box 1, drawer 1, box 2, right on down the row. Mm-hmm. And so finally, after a year or two of that, ended up moving me down to the 712 building, which is now where they're building the new city of Richland, across from Richland Library, where they're building the new city hall. That was the original records place, built in 51 or 52.
Okay.
It was just a big concrete bunker, basically, which is a really cool place. So I ended up getting moved into there in some space. The print people, the Union Print Shop was still there at the time, so it was me and them. And I loved that place. It was just Hanford from the 50s.
Right.
It hadn't changed a bit. And so we stand in there, and then, of course, they kept, that was a very expensive building to maintain because it was old, full of asbestos and all kinds of stuff. So that's when we ended up getting moved out to 3212 when they were building 3220 to store the collection. So that's where I got out there with all my stuff again. So I had, like I say, this huge footprint carrying these negatives around.
Right.
And that was a great place to work for an archivist. It was in the back of the building, back with all the pipes and everything, and nobody bothered you. You were just back there doing your thing, and it was great.
And so how long did you you don't still work out there?
No.
No. And when did you finally retire?
Well, they asked me to leave 2.5 years ago.
Oh, okay.
One of those.
One of those like early retire or kind of.
It was like, hi. You walk in there, there's a human resources lady sitting there, and you go, okay, I know what this is. Like, okay, don't blow it. Just make nice. No, nothing good will come out of anything other than being nice. So yeah, that was 2.5 years ago. Okay. So what you're seeing me out there now doing is volunteer work.
Right.
I got connected up with Colleen and stuff, and I still thrive on doing this stuff. That's why I'm doing it.
Great.
Love access.
Yeah. And so you still have your clearance and everything to get out there?
Nope. Well, see, that's all BREC. See, that's open to the public.
Oh, okay.
I'll do it again coming up this year. The Russians come over for their reactor inspection tour, the PPRA, yearly. That's a treaty that we signed with them in late 90s, I think it was. Yeah. We inspect each other's reactors to see what's happening and make sure that, we're not making plutonium, and two, they are, because they're dual-purpose reactors, what they're doing with it, apparently. So I was doing that for 5 or 6 years before, and I found it quite fascinating. It's something you have to be respectful and careful, and we duplicate the picture we shot the year prior for their report they make, if the building still exists. And now it's getting down to a little bit of 100K West and B reactor. And so the PNNL folks like it because I've done it enough. Battelle knows me, the Russians know me, and everybody likes that uniformity.
Right.
So that's a fun thing to do for me. And that one, again, you get a temporary badge, and we're going, and I truck along, and then they're turning pictures real quick for them, and then we have a final banquet where they sign the report and everything, and that's always quite interesting.
Oh yeah, I bet.
Because it's really cool. They love to toast everything.
Yes, they do.
It takes a while.
Yeah, I've been to Eastern Europe. Toasts are a way of life.
Oh God. So anyway, I'm still doing that, and I'm looking forward to doing more of that. So
that's really great. So tell me how you got involved with Burma at the B Reactor Museum.
Well, it was kind of after I quit working out there regular. These guys, I was aware of them,
Sure.
And so one of them called me up and said, we're looking for something, and everybody's always calling me looking for something. And he said, you ought to join. And I said, well, I probably should, just to keep my hand in things. And so that's kind of how I become connected with it. And really, it's really neat to sit in a room where there's 20 guys who really knew their stuff.
Yeah.
It's something else to have that ability. So I've been doing that, and then of course I hear of things coming down the road and kind of watch the national park thing develop, and getting involved with Colleen. Every once I have to remind her, you got something coming up? Do you need pictures? Oh yeah. But that was the way out there. We always, especially when we were working for Lockheed. Lockheed was working on getting, the MSA contract, and so they were in the full PR. Look how good a company we are. You should have us do the contract thing. So we were doing all kinds of stuff. And back again 10 years ago, things weren't as tight as they are now. So our display group was actually making all kinds of display stuff for Lockheed Corporate.
Okay.
Under Linda Gooden. And she grew her outfit quite large, but we went along for that ride, and so we had people to go just do nothing but do displays and take them out. That was not a Hanford-related thing, but it was, we kind of had the ability to do all kinds of stuff, which has always been exciting to be involved with something like that.
Right, a mix of things from site-specific to
and
more PR.
Of course, everything couldn't have been done fast enough, and you learn there, that when they want it, but they don't think they want it. So you have to sort of manage your managers in a way. You have to be ready to, well, they haven't asked yet, but they're going to want.
Right.
You just learn after you get.
How was the transition to digital photography for you as a photographer and someone that works with, and an archivist? I'm kind of curious as to how you've managed that transition.
Well, it was for some reason it was much harder than it should have been to get the digital equipment. Somehow it got involved with the printing people and how much elaborate stuff they go through to buy equipment. And we had people high up kind of, how in the hell is this taking so long? You just go buy some computers. But it somehow gotten into somewhere where you had to write things of why this would be good, and it just drug on interminably. Mm-hmm. And so we did, on the computer part, we had the film scanner was always kind of a difficult thing because they just weren't that good at the time. Mm-hmm. And we'd always kind of prided ourselves in doing good things, exceptional things. Well, that's one thing I should mention of the evolution of film sizes. 4x5 was kind of the standard from the 40s.
Yep.
And so when I came out there, I had the fortune through our little business arrangements at the high school. I was making money, actually. And I needed a camera to shoot because they weren't giving me anything. And so I ended up buying a Hasselblad of all things in 1965.
That's so expensive.
It was the list price was $600 then.
Yeah.
And the local photo counter down there, the guy, he knew I was looking for one and I was a regular. He said, if you can keep your mouth shut, I've had this Hasselblad sitting here way too long on my inventory. He said, it cost me $435. I'll sell it to you for my cost to move it. So I got it at a discount. I still have it.
Wow. Yeah, well, those are cameras that you passed those down.
Oh God, yeah. So I've still got all the stuff, and so I was kind of primed up, and then I started working summers out there, and then you see all the real, the stuff you see in magazines. Here it is in front of you. Mm-hmm. So as it evolved, when I went out there, they weren't shooting speed graphics. They were shooting Linhof Technicas. Big, huge, gorgeous cameras, mm-hmm. heavy as. And then there were view cameras too, because just the technical stuff they did. And then it kind of evolved into 2 1/4 roll film, which was principally a Hasselblad with a set of lenses. Everybody had one. Everybody pretty much had a Technica set up. They had view cameras, and they had the Hasselblads. And 35 millimeter was considered miniature. And it was only for shooting slides, pretty much. And that kept on. And some of the illustrator types in Battelle wanted to have that editorial look, so they would go shoot black and white, so you get the grain look and all that stuff. But the thing of choice was 2 1/4 roll film. And then of course it evolved from black and white, and then the color started slipping in there. They were shooting some color sheet film, and it seemed like the preferred way at that point was transparencies first. And there were still some of those floating around in the files.
Yeah.
And then it would move over into 50-50 black and white. Sometimes they'd go out and shoot black and white and color at the same assignment if they had the time. If subjects were moving around, you couldn't do that. But they still wanted black and white prints versus color, because color was considered premium cost. So to make it look like you were not wasting money, you had done black and white. I've had people tell me that I don't care what it costs, but I don't want it to look like I spent any money. So, you're out there. You just roll with whatever, and that's part of the key to my being there so long, is I was quite flexible in going with whatever you could do. So anyway, it evolved into roll film, and then we finally, on the digital thing, when we finally got this block of equipment, I think they bought 2 Nikon D1s. Which, probably a cell phone now would. But we had all the Nikon stuff, so it was a natural to go with that because the lenses still were compatible, and that was the beauty of that. We always were Nikon out there just because we had massive amounts of lenses and everything.
That's why I'm always buy Canons, because I just
you got
inherited Canon.
That's right.
Lenses,
that's what you do. Yeah, there's no sense in reinventing the wheel there. So that's kind of how that evolved, and you can see that, and also you can see the quantities of negative shot increase with the smaller film. Sheet film, there's a lot of work involved, loading holders and processing and everything. And then when you get to roll film, well, hell, there's 12 on a roll,
right?
So you shoot them all.
Right. And then now in the digital age,
you're
just limited.
I'll go out to B reactor, and you figure that's 300 shots easy without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
And you give somebody 25.
Yeah. It's a different, which is also I think a challenge for archivists moving forward, is the amount of stuff we produce in a digital world is greater. And,
and how much of this stuff I've been giving you is that, well, I'll give you the raw and then what I gave the customer, but then here's the other 250, which I can't bring myself to throw away, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah.
You just never know.
Did your parents work for Hanford at all? Or
Nope.
Did they? Okay, so you were the first one.
Well, what happened? All my uncles and ultimately my dad, they were all in the service in World War II. They were. This is all from Nebraska.
Okay.
They'd had a rough time in a depression. They lost the farms. They were traveling around before the war, picking fruit, doing whatever. They'd been out here before the war. My grandma's sister was out here and they had the family farm they had was a typical chicken and eggs and fruit and alfalfa, everything, a truck farm. Mm-hmm. And so after the war, they all decided that it was time to get out of Nebraska. So in all their travels, they had decided this was the good spot to go. I was born in 46, essentially 47, and I think they came out in 48 and settled right when Cold War was starting to ramp up. So there was plenty of employment.
Right.
The family had always been carpenters and the like, and Dad, he had carpenter experience and working in lumber yards and stuff, and it's kind of my joke out of Caddyshack is he ended up right in the lumber yard. Mm-hmm. Of all the places you could work in here, he never made an attempt to get on at Hanford. He was working various lumber yards around and wholesale hardware and stuff like that.
Okay.
And my other uncle did get involved in it, so. But so that's how it come to be. And Mom, she was secretary at First Lutheran Church, and so and again there you probably have picked up there was then especially there was sort of an animosity against Richland, from Pasco and Kennewick.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's very interesting.
Well, the perception was, especially since Richland was a company town at first,
right,
and they were renting these places in essence. So the government or the GE was the landlord, mm-hmm. and everybody worked Pasco Kennewick, they were their own, it's like, well, they had a light bulb change, they just call somebody up and the company come and change the light bulb. And just, all that kind of stuff. Locally, I totally, growing up in Kennewick, benefited from Hanford big time, because a lot of Hanford, especially the doctor level and stuff, they didn't live in Richland. They lived in Kennewick and Pasco, and they wanted their kids as well educated as the kids in Richland. So the push was, boy, you have good schools in the Tri-Cities. That was just the accepted thing. So, a lot of my contemporaries and then were fathers worked out here. So, there was just a different set of expectations that went along with all that. So
that kind of, that middle class and upper middle class affluence in Richland kind of...
it's spilled over.
Right,
big time. So, but I benefited totally from that environment and just those expectations. You were going to go to college. You were going to do this. You were going to do...
Right. But so you're saying that there was maybe some resentment of that GE and the government took care of people.
Way past.
That they were.
Yeah, now that was just probably a jealousy or something.
Yeah.
Dad, he worked in the lumberyard in Pasco, and in summer he'd have to come up and help fill in. There was a lumberyard up here on Van Giesen, where Boehm's Chocolate is or was. There was a lumberyard in there at one point. So he hated to come up here. He said, they expect so damn much, and they don't want to pay for anything. And he called them smashers, for Atom smashers.
Oh, okay.
Damn smashers. God.
That's really, I have not heard that before.
Well, that was his term.
Right, I like that.
Yeah. And then, of course, at that time, Richland had a really, really good basketball team. Art Daywald was the coach in that era. And so there was that was kind of the high school sports thing. And then Pasco and Kennewick had a giant rivalry in football. Mm-hmm. And that game was the only day game they played, and that was always on Veterans Day. And that was a big deal, big time. So,
can you describe growing up in the Tri-Cities in the Cold War and how, being so close to Hanford, but living in Kennewick or Pasco, was there any kind of fear of that Hanford would have been a prime target if the war?
Oh yeah, we were totally afraid of the Russians. That was not necessarily anything nasty out there. It was more the Russians. No, we had probably not as intense as Richland with the duck and cover stuff. I don't think we were ever scrambling under desks or anything, and we didn't have any air raid sirens. I know Richland did.
Okay.
And they brought those things in from World War II, set them up around town here.
Right.
And so we had our instructions, and I know one time, I wish I had one of these things, they were flying around in airplanes one time throwing out little pamphlets to what should you do.
Like civil defense
pamphlets? Yeah, right, yeah. And it was just...
That's an odd way to just...
God, I know it, but I wish the hell I had one, because I found one stuck in a tree. And so, but no, and unfortunately, it was hyped up enough. That home lived in a wood frame house. And in the night, the wind would get to blowing and banging against the house and stuff. And there were several times I'd convince myself it was a bomb going off.
Oh, wow.
It was serious stuff.
Wow. You
were totally into it.
Was there ever any worry that you knew in the communities, Kennewick, Pasco, of the environmental aspect of Hanford?
No.
Or any kind of...
No.
Okay.
That just wasn't happening yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even though, because the Green Run, right, was in 1940.
Well, nobody knew about that until, what? That was probably, you even heard of it until probably 20 years after it happened or something, or the downwinders got going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've sat there before and said, hey, 1954, November, where the hell was I that day? The wind was coming out of, so, you start thinking about it then, but, and like I say, so for me, I was kind of proud of the place. I still am.
Right.
Of what happened and everything. And so I've benefited, hoping to die, but benefited greatly from the whole business.
Right.
We had one couple of Christmases ago, the family got together, and my brother, he's working sheet metal contract out there, foreman for that, and his two sons, they were working down at Hermiston and in getting rid of the mustard and nerve gas and stuff.
Oh, right.
And I'm going, damn, World War II's still been good to this family. We're still working because of it, which is, true.
Yeah, there's legacy aspects.
Yeah,
of
totally.
Weapons production.
And of course, back then, the science thing was big. I remember in 1957, the International Geophysical Year and all the stuff we got handed at school. And, it was something to be, technology was just to be treasured
right.
in this environment especially.
Right.
So.
Do you, what are some of your memories of some of the major events in the Tri-Cities? Like, did you go to any Atomic Frontier Days parades, or or what about Kennedy's visit or Nixon's visit?
Well, let's see. Atomic Frontier Day. See, that was back when Richland was still we didn't go to Richland.
Okay.
No, we don't go to Richland.
Okay.
We're much more Pasco-Kennewick oriented on that.
Right.
I missed the Nixon visit because I was in the service.
Okay.
And the Kennedy visit was 62, 63, something. That one, Jesus, I was I was 60. I just wasn't conscious of it at that point. It just wasn't something you did. I do remember they had Eisenhower come out in 54 to dedicate McNary Dam. And they ran school buses, loads of kids down to see it. My folks wouldn't let me go because they didn't like him.
Were your folks Democrats?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, hardcore.
But like FD era, like progressive New Deal era Democrats, or?
Yeah, kind of. They were just a Republican. So there was that type of thing going on. I became aware of. Fortunately, in high school, I had some very good instructors who made us politically aware, and so I knew all about Magnuson and Jackson and how all that works. And the more I find out, the more interesting that gets.
Yeah, yeah. Could you describe the ways in which security or secrecy at Hanford has impacted your work?
Oh,
there?
Yeah. Well, that's just what you did. It was just an expectation. And you go out there and here's all these guards and all this stuff, and you just played the game. You just kind of. I never considered it necessarily a burden. It was tedious and ponderous at times, but you just. You do what they say. They make the rules. They can change the rules. They can enforce the rules or not enforce the rules. You're powerless, so you just go along. It's real simple.
Yeah. What would you like future generations to know about working at Hanford during the Cold War and then afterward, or just your kind of experience at Hanford?
Well, first thing I've kind of learned is you can't judge anything from the past in light of how you judge things today.
Sure.
That is the most, people kind of, especially, Pearl Harbor and the activities around then, and we were sort of caught flat-footed, and then some of the things that went on, the internment camps and things like that. It's just like, you gotta go, okay, we didn't know what the heck was going on. We didn't know if they were going to land in Portland the next day or something, and so you react, and some of those reactions weren't the best in the world, but you can't. And of that, and then the same thing with the environmental stuff out there, you can't call any of those folks dumb or not caring, because all the stuff I've seen and all the images and stuff, everybody was doing the best of their ability with what they had. And so there wasn't any just slipshod, we don't care except maybe a green run or something, but you kind of look at some of that as an overzealous, because again it's all kind of all driven by fear, or unknowns. Mm-hmm. So just for that not to be forgotten. and also that those people were as smart, or probably smarter than we are, I think, as far as thinking things through and making do, because that's always been my contention with the construction camp and everything of the 30, 43, 45. They didn't, if you were draft age, you weren't there unless you had some real specialty. They recruited out of the Southeast, and they didn't want to recruit workers from the industrial shipbuilding and all that, take those away. So they were down in the South where there was workers available. And all these people had just survived a depression. And they knew how to make do, and they come up here and continued to make do. So that's kind of my thing, is that just that whole, and it's unfortunate that such a great amount of energy and everything was expended on something that had such a nasty result. But it's just.
What about later in the Cold War, though, in the 50s through the late 80s, and kind of that mass of, because a lot of conversations about Hanford, there's the World War II Hanford, but then there's much larger mission, but with not such a dramatic conclusion to it, right?
Right.
Kind of the Cold War just kind of made 20,000 nuclear weapons around
whatever,
and it fizzled out.
Well, see, I was the Cold War ramp up thing was like, that was, I just caught probably the tail end of that. But kind of, maybe I'm wondering here a little bit. I always just kind of think it was so cool to be part of this process where all these things were happening. And being somewhat of an insider of it, I have a whole different perspective of things. If you say radiation, I go, well, okay, what kind and how much? Not radiation. Yeah. Now, I'd be that way with nerve gas from Umatilla. Which way do I run?
Yeah. Nerve gas is nerve gas.
That's right.
Way you look at it.
So I've just always been kind of had a little better understanding of what was going on, and realized there are phenomenal risks still out there. And when you're working with guys who, in the day we were doing in-tank, waste tank inspections by putting a Hasselblad on a rig, shooting argon over the lens to keep it clean, buttoning this thing up in plastic and dropping it down a riser, and rotating the camera, shooting pictures with a strobe inside to see the tank walls.
Wow.
Now they do it digital.
Yeah.
So that was some of our specialists who that's what they did. And I got involved in, always in the after thing of all that stuff. I would be handling the film and processing things, and so.
Was that done for all of the tanks?
Oh God, yeah.
Oh wow. That's really,
yeah, I did.
Such a laborious.
Oh, totally.
I mean, it's necessary work.
Yeah, right.
That's such a laborious kind of technical process to go through.
Oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, I went through for an outside contractor, went through and basically did all the single shell tanks that we could find, everything I could find on each one of them. Of course, that stuff, is in essence obsolete now because of age and whatever.
Right.
And it was fascinating stuff because it was just so scary or so potentially bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So. It's just a really technical thing, and I want to throw in a little pitch. The environmental stuff for the photo lab, back when I first came there, pretty much everything went down the drain. And again, it's photochemicals, and then when the Hunt brothers kind of tried to corner the silver market there for a while, our boss Lance Michael, we were massive amounts of fixer we were generating. So he, on his own initiative, started reclaiming silver. We had a whole setup out there. We used an electrolytic process. So we were kind of ahead of that curve by our own doing. And we were actually scraping stuff. We were doing the whole thing. And then as it got tighter and tighter, we started, doing whatever is deemed proper at the time. And so we had that running pretty tight. There was one time the state, we were functioning as a photo lab like you'd see in Seattle or Portland or anywhere else, pretty much doing the same rules because it's all the same stuff. And they had some state inspector came in, and since we were Hanford, we were kind of targeted, I think. And we ultimately one time ran parallel processes on all the waste streams coming out of our processors, running typical batches of film. The state people brought in their sets of jugs and stuff to collect, and since the Hanford people didn't quite trust vice versa, they were doing a double set. And then they sent this stuff off, spent horrific amounts of money that proved we were doing everything right. We didn't really get passed on the head. Everybody's just glad it was over. But whoops.
Right.
So we were doing a good job.
Cool.
And the cool thing about that too is our negatives are still hanging in there really well as far as process. I've had that question before. Well, aren't your negatives getting old and blah blah blah? And some lady from somewhere back east one time, and I was very nice about it, but I said, well, no, our negatives are wonderful. They're not fading. They're not because one, we had the budget and everything to do everything correctly, so everything was thoroughly washed, thoroughly fixed, everything, and then also they've all been stored in human conditions. They haven't been in a Connex box or anything. They're out where people are, so we're in a desert. There's no humidity. Everything.
Yeah, that's really good for long term.
Yeah. Oh, so everything's fine. We do have. I think they've got them out now. I went through and did a study on nitrate-based negatives, and I found you do all your work and mostly early 50s. And mostly it was Ansco and maybe a few DuPonts and stuff. I found about 1,100. And you could just, in a storage box, you could just open the box up and sniff, and you can tell. So there's something in here. So I went ahead and kind of made some, I think they pulled them out eventually. But that nitrate thing is, especially in a Hanford environment, what do you do with them? Fortunately, they're scattered all over the place, so there's not a critical mass of them. And what the archive folks were doing is they were pulling them out and freezing them.
Yep.
And but here, if you have a whole freezer full of nitrate negatives, you've created a waste.
Yeah.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Right. Yes.
But we had our share of 90-day storage pads and saving film and to recycle and the yearly contract, and we had our ion exchange column. We were doing everything.
Cool.
It was good.
That's good. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to talk about or mention?
Oh, I'm sure there'll be 20 things the minute I walk out the door.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate it. It was really illuminating to hear you to get some of that information on the photos and your perspective on Hanford, having not only worked there but also seen so much of the history from the photo side. Yeah,
great. Yeah, well, I've just like I say, I didn't want it to end. I was just having way too much fun.
Yeah, I bet.
And it was, the more like the more time you invest and the more time goes on, the more you start to make connections of things, and it's just like, wow, this is I'm just getting good.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, all righty.
All right.
Great.